The lake lies frozen in the Canadian North, 500 miles from Churchill, Manitoba, surrounded by tundra and snow and endless silence. This is Lake Anjikuni, a place where legends are born. Tonight, we travel to November of 1930, to a story that may be truth, may be legend, or maybe something in between. A story of a village that vanished, of people who disappeared without a trace, of a mystery that has never been solved. Close your eyes. Let us journey north, into the cold, into the silence, into the unknown. The Canadian North in 1930 was a different world, remote, isolated. Vast stretches of wilderness where civilization was measured in days of travel, not hours, where trappers and traders moved through the landscape like ghosts, stopping at small settlements for rest and supplies before disappearing back into the white expanse. The Inuit people had lived in this land for thousands of years. They knew the ice. They knew the snow. They knew how to survive where survival seemed impossible. Their villages dotted the landscape, small communities built on the shores of frozen lakes, sustained by fishing, hunting, and the ancient knowledge passed down through generations. Lake Anjikuni was one such place. The stories say there was a village here, a fishing village, home to perhaps 30 people, perhaps more. The numbers vary in the telling. Families who had lived on these shores for years, who knew every rock, every ice formation, every fishing spot on the lake. Into this world walked Joe LaBelle, a fur trapper, a man who knew the North, who had traveled these routes before. In November of 1930, according to the story, he was making his way across the frozen landscape, his snowshoes carrying him mile after mile through the snow. He was heading toward the village on Lake Anjikuni. He had been there before. He knew the people. He expected, as he always had before, to find welcome there, a warm fire, hot food, a place to rest before continuing his journey. As he approached the village, he noticed something strange. Silence. Complete and total silence. In a living village, there are always sounds. Dogs barking, children playing, the voices of people going about their daily work, the sounds of life. But here there was nothing, just the wind across the ice, just the crunch of his snowshoes in the snow. LaBelle felt the first stirrings of unease. He called out. His voice echoed across the frozen lake. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. He entered the village, and what he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The dwellings stood empty, tents and huts still standing, still intact, but abandoned. LaBelle moved from one to the next, calling, searching, hoping for some sign of life. But there was none. Inside the dwellings he found the remnants of interrupted lives. Meals prepared but never eaten, food still hanging over fire pits, now cold and frozen, shirts left unfinished, needles still stuck in the fabric, as if the seamstress had simply stood up and walked away mid-stitch. Personal belongings lay scattered about, tools, clothing, supplies, everything that the villagers would need for daily life, everything they would surely have taken if they had planned to leave. But the people were gone. All of them, men, women, children, vanished. LaBelle's unease grew into fear. He searched more frantically now. He looked in every dwelling. He called out names. He searched the surrounding area. But there was no one, no sign of where they had gone, no tracks leading away from the village, at least none that he could find in the snow. And then he found something that chilled him even more than the empty village. The dogs, 7 sled dogs, tied to posts, dead, starved to death. In the Arctic, dogs were life. They were transportation. They were hunting partners. They were protection. No one would leave their dogs behind. No one would leave them to starve. It was unthinkable. But here they were, dead, abandoned. And there was something else, a grave. Near the village there was a grave, but it had been disturbed. The stones that had covered it had been moved. The grave had been opened from within, or so it appeared. The earth had been pushed outward, not dug inward. LaBelle stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by silence and mystery and growing dread. What had happened here? Where were the people? Why had they left everything behind? Why had they left their dogs to die? He had to get help. He had to report this. He turned and began the long journey back to civilization, back to the nearest outpost, back to people who could help him make sense of what he had seen. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police received LaBelle's report with skepticism at first, then with concern. They organized a search party. They traveled north to Lake Anjikuni to investigate this strange story of a vanished village. And what they found confirmed LaBelle's account, at least in part. The village was indeed abandoned. The dwellings stood empty. There were signs of sudden departure, but the Mounties, trained observers, found no evidence of violence, no signs of struggle, no indication of what might have caused an entire community to disappear. They searched the surrounding area. They looked for tracks, for signs of where the villagers might have gone. The snow made tracking difficult, but they found nothing definitive. No trail leading away, no indication of mass movement in any direction. They interviewed other trappers, other travelers who had passed through the area. Had anyone seen the villagers? Had anyone heard of their plans to relocate? But no one had any information. The people of Lake Anjikuni had simply vanished. The story spread. Newspapers picked it up. A vanished village, an entire community gone without a trace. The headlines sensationalized it. The details grew in the telling. Some accounts claimed there had been 2,000 people in the village, though this was almost certainly an exaggeration. Such a large settlement would have been well known, well documented. It would not have simply disappeared without more witnesses, more evidence. But the core of the story remained. A village on Lake Anjikuni had been found abandoned. The people were gone, and no one knew why. Theories emerged, as they always do when facts are scarce and mystery is abundant. Some believed the villagers had been attacked by an enemy tribe and taken away, but there were no signs of battle, no blood, no bodies, no indication of violence. Others suggested they had fled from some danger, perhaps a wild animal, perhaps a natural disaster. But why would they not take their supplies? Why would they leave their dogs? And where had they gone? The Arctic in November is not forgiving. A group of people fleeing without preparation would not survive long. Some whispered of supernatural explanations, spirits of the lake, ancient curses, forces beyond human understanding. The Inuit themselves had stories of strange things in the north, of beings that could steal people away, of places where the natural and supernatural blurred together. And there were those who suggested something even stranger. Lights in the sky had been reported in the area around that time. Strange lights, unexplained phenomena. Could the villagers have been taken by something not of this earth? It was the kind of speculation that thrived in the absence of facts. But perhaps the most unsettling theory was the simplest one, that the villagers had simply walked away, that something had compelled them, something had driven them to leave everything behind and walk into the wilderness. But what could cause an entire community to do such a thing? What could overwhelm their survival instincts, their connection to their home, their need to protect their children? In the years that followed, investigators returned to the mystery periodically. They reviewed the evidence. They interviewed witnesses. But the story became increasingly difficult to verify. Joe LaBelle was a real person, but his account could not be fully corroborated. The original newspaper articles that reported the story have been lost or were never properly documented to begin with. Some researchers have concluded that the story of Lake Anjikuni is more legend than fact, that it grew in the telling, embellished by journalists looking for sensational stories, amplified by those who loved a good mystery. They point out inconsistencies in the various versions of the tale. They note the lack of official records from the RCMP. They suggest that perhaps there was a kernel of truth, a small abandoned camp that LaBelle found, but that it grew into something far more dramatic in the retelling. Others maintain that something real happened at Lake Anjikuni, that while the details may have been exaggerated, the core mystery remains. A community, whether 30 people or 300, vanished from the shores of that northern lake. And no satisfactory explanation has ever been found. The debate continues. Historians argue, researchers investigate, skeptics dismiss, believers hold fast to the mystery. And Lake Anjikuni remains frozen and silent, keeping whatever secrets it holds. What is certain is this: the story of Lake Anjikuni has become part of the folklore of the Canadian North. It is a tale told around campfires, whispered in the long Arctic nights. It represents something primal in human fear, the terror of disappearance, of losing people without explanation, without closure, without understanding. In indigenous communities across the North, there are oral histories of people who went missing, of small groups who disappeared, of mysteries that were never solved. The harsh environment, the vast distances, the extreme weather, all made survival precarious. It was not uncommon for trappers to vanish, for small camps to be found abandoned. The North was dangerous. The North took people. This was understood. This was accepted. But an entire village? That was different. That was inexplicable. Whether the Lake Anjikuni incident happened exactly as the stories say, or whether it is an amalgamation of multiple events and legends woven together over time, it speaks to a deeper truth about the mysterious power of the northern wilderness. There are places in this world where human presence is tenuous at best, where nature dominates so completely that civilization seems like a temporary intrusion, a brief flicker of warmth and light in an overwhelming darkness. The far north is one such place. It is beautiful, it is deadly, it is unknowable. Lake Anjikuni today is still remote, still isolated. You can travel there if you are determined enough. If you have the equipment and the knowledge and the courage, you will find a lake. You will find tundra and rock and ice. You will find silence, but you will not find answers. The lake does not give up its secrets. The wind does not whisper explanations. The ice does not reveal what it may have witnessed 90 years ago. The story remains. The mystery endures. And somewhere in the frozen north, perhaps, the truth waits. Patient, silent, hidden beneath layers of snow and time and legend. Tonight, we remember the village that may have been, the people who may have vanished, the mystery that may be fact or may be fiction or maybe something in between. We remember because the unknown haunts us, because unanswered questions linger in the mind long after the facts have faded, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones where the ending remains unwritten. The lake lies frozen in the Canadian North, 500 miles from Churchill, surrounded by tundra and snow and endless silence. This is Lake Anjikuni, a place where legends are born, a place where truth and myth blur together like snow and wind. Let us rest now, here at the edge of the known world, where mystery dwells in the spaces between facts, and silence holds more questions than answers. Sleep well.